everyone, and welcome to our next installment of the GEMA Talks. I'm thrilled today to actually have one of my Georgetown classmates with us, Mark Abbott. Mark is the Deputy Commissioner and President of Major League Soccer, and Mark was actually the first employee of Major League Soccer back in 1993 and has been involved in the tremendous growth of MLS through those years. So we really exciting conversation, I think, talking about that growth, talking about how they've navigated through COVID, which they've done quite deftly in the last few months, and be interesting to hear his perspective on that and other trends in soccer. And then we're also going to explore Mark's career and how he progressed into working at MLS. So Mark, I want to say hello and hope you're doing well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So first, first thing I probably want to start with, if you could just lay out the land right now for everyone on where you are at Major League Soccer season right now, because you guys explain how you sort of did the tournament.
Sure.
Why don't we start with that, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So this is our 25th season, and we had actually begun the last weekend of February, and things were going very well. We had 2 weeks of the season behind us, and then. Like all the leagues, chose to shut down in the second week of March. And once we shut down, we began immediately planning for how we could relaunch, given the challenges of COVID and what was happening in the country. And we ultimately decided that we would create what's known as a bubble. Ours was in Orlando, which is also where the NBA's bubble is. And we launched ours at the end of June. And we had all of our teams come there. They were able to train in their markets for a few weeks before arriving in Orlando. And then everybody trained for about a week once they got to Orlando. And then we had almost a World Cup type tournament. We had group play where each of the teams played 3 games, and those counted towards the regular season. And then we got down from 26 teams to 16, and we had a knockout tournament. And on August 11th, we had our championship match, which was won by Portland Timbers. So that ended the controlled environment or bubble portion of the season. So we started, everybody had 2 games in early March, 3 games in the bubble. And then now what we've done is relaunched teams playing in their markets, in most cases without fans. And in most cases, they travel to the game on the same day and they play the game and they travel home at night. Some exceptions to that. And everybody's going to play another 12 matches this way. We started that in mid-April. Another 18 matches that way. We did 6 in the first phase of that, and now another 12 in the middle of the second phase that we just announced. So season will end November 8th, and then our playoffs begin November 20th, and we have our championship game on December 12th, MLS Cup.
Wow, and everything's played outdoors, if I think, in MLS.
Yeah, yeah, correct. So
it'll be interesting to see who's playing, where they're playing on December 12th.
You know, we've had some. We were in Toronto one year. We were in Kansas City, so it gets a little chilly. But you know, we play in all sorts. The only thing that stops us is lightning, or now it seems potentially fires. You know, we play in really inclement weather, including cold.
Talk to everyone here about the tremendous planning that had to go into place. I can't imagine all the logistics, and it was almost probably like 3-dimensional chess, thinking about how to continue with the season and how to making decisions you made about a bubble and a tournament. Can you talk a little bit about how long that took and how you made those decisions?
Yeah, so we really started working on it in mid-March, and the challenge in mid-March was that I think everybody recognized the foundation to getting back was frequent testing, and to be able to test athletes and know when someone was had the virus and isolate them and then find a way for everybody else to move forward. And there wasn't, as you know, testing available at that time for anybody, but really people who were either very ill or frontline healthcare workers. And that's the way it should have been. That's where the resources should have been. And I don't think anybody disagreed with that. So we started to work on, and we had a woman in the league office who was also an attorney who's our chief administrative officer and head of our human resources, but also took over developing our testing protocols. And so we had outside medical advisors. We developed these protocols, even though the testing wasn't available. So we were sort of anticipating once testing was available, how it would work. So that was the first thing that had to happen. The second is you had to get regulatory approval. And we'll talk a little bit about what that meant when we returned to playing in our markets, because there you had to go get regulatory approval in lots of different jurisdictions, all of which had different views, and particularly in Canada, where they have very different views as to whether sports should continue or not. And that's happened in baseball. We've seen that. So in this case, we needed regulatory approvals from the state of Florida and the local jurisdiction where we were at the Swan and the Dolphin, which is on the Disney World property. That's where we were. So we needed regulatory approvals. But to lay the foundation for that, we actually started working with the other leagues in sort of an informal process where I think the industry came together and said, if we're going to move forward, we have to have a set of protocols that says that even though if someone tests positive, the rest of the team can continue to move forward with activity if they test negative and are asymptomatic. So under the CDC guidance at that time, many states took a look at it. If you were a close contact to somebody who tested positive, you yourself had to quarantine for 14 days. That wouldn't work in a sports context. If the entire team had to shut down for 14 days, you really couldn't operate. So all the leagues came together, their medical advisors, and really, although each league has its own version of this, the basic protocol is that when someone tests positive, they're isolated, get the care that they need. But those people who continue negatively test, and that's why we have frequent testing, in some cases daily or every other day, they can continue with activity as long as they can test negative. And that was the core to the sports protocol. That's what allowed the industry to move forward. Reviewed that with the CDC, with the federal government, with a lot of state governments and health departments. And that's how all the leagues were able to continue with activity. Canada is a particularly unique situation in that they have this cross-border travel restriction. And so if you are from America and you travel to Canada, you got to quarantine for 14 days, and there's no exceptions to it. So we started out, once we finished the bubble, teams in Canada playing against Canadian teams only. And now they've come to the United States on extended road trips. So they're down on a 9-day road trip. They each have a headquarters where they're sort of training and playing their home games, even though it's not their home stadium. And then they'll go back to Canada for a couple of days, and then they'll come back on another road trip. So it's this patchwork of, state laws that are all different, and every health department has its own view. It all had to be navigated. So that was the second big task. And then just the logistics of having 26 teams in a resort hotel in Florida, or 2 hotels actually, as it turned out to be. And all that went into that, how do you feed them in a way that's safe? And so the hotels worked with us and created a set of protocols where food service was provided, but in a way that was safe given the COVID environment. We reached agreement where we would test the hotel workers, we tested the bus drivers that would drive the players from the hotel to the training facilities and to where the games were. So it was this massive, we had this massive ballroom where all these chairs, and you go in there and I got tested 25 times. Wow. And players got tested every other day. And, we'd get results back and sort of make decisions based on the results. So it was a massive, massive undertaking that no one had ever done. I'm not sure anybody wants to do it again, but it allowed us to get going. And the reason we chose to do that as opposed to immediately starting in our markets is we knew we could execute on it. We knew that we had the concentration of testing resources, probably the most difficult thing, all in one place. Yeah. We knew that we could, through this bubble environment, it wasn't completely, shut off from the outside world, but you could control it. And when we began, we did screening before people came in, and 2 teams right when they arrived had a number of people that had the virus when they arrived. And so we isolated them. They ultimately left the bubble. And after that, we only had 2 positive tests in the remaining 6 weeks. So it was very, very successful from that perspective.
Yeah. And you had accommodating, cooperating players, which is an important piece too.
It was, in the middle of it, we had to renegotiate our CBA in a variety of different reasons to reflect the changes of what's happening as a result of the economics of the game, obviously, and to reach agreement on having them come to the bubble. And there was a lot of concern for reasons I understand about being separated from your family and what did this mean, and is it going to be safe? And at that point in time, Florida was one of the epicenters. And we kept making the point, well, we're not playing in Florida. We're playing in a controlled environment. It's not in the outside community. And so I think there was a lot of concern and skepticism, but I'm very proud of the players for one, being courageous and coming, and two, conducting themselves in a way which is what is the biggest lesson you learn from all of this now is that by safe behaviors, continuing social distance, wear your mask, all the things that we hear on television every day, it's really, really true. That's what contributes more than anything to safety. Testing allows you to isolate it when it's happened, but it's really safe conduct that is the key to the whole thing.
Yeah, that's great. Can you delineate what your duties as deputy commissioner are versus Don Garber, who's commissioner? What are you sort of day-to-day in charge of and responsible for?
Sure. So I focus on a number of different things. Probably the biggest part of my job is I oversee the players and competition. So we, as you may know, have a unique structure where all the player contracts are with the league. The league doesn't pick the players, the teams pick the players, but the league signs the player to contracts. And so we have a group that does that. And so I oversee the people who oversee that group, and then our competition group and referees. So that's the biggest aspect of my responsibilities. I also oversee the medical area, which probably wasn't as involved as it had been in the last few months. We were focused on other issues, a lot of orthopedic issues, concussions. We've always had a sort of cutting edge concussion protocol. And so we spent a lot of work on that in the last several years, and those things remain important. But clearly this was a pivot for us when COVID came up. Yeah. I'm a lawyer by background, and so I oversee the legal department. I oversee the financial department, and I oversee communications. So that's my portfolio. So it's sort of quite varied.
Yeah. So why don't we rewind a bit here, quite a bit. And I'd love to start. I believe you said you grew up in Minnesota.
I did. So I was born in England. We came to the United States in 1966. I spent a little time in Massachusetts, and then we moved to Minnesota in 1972. That's where I grew up, and then came to Georgetown like you did in 1980.
And I think you mentioned that you had some affiliation with soccer based on your dad being British.
Yeah, so in 1974 was sort of the beginning of youth soccer in many ways. A lot of these park and rec departments across the country looked at soccer as a really healthy sport, not all that expensive. They wanted to start soccer programs. And so they came to my father, who had an English accent, and they said, would you start a soccer program in Oakdale, Minnesota? And so he did. It was a bit unique at that point in time. And I grew up in hockey country and played hockey. And my father asked me to be a referee when I was 12 years old. It's an experience that I've almost gotten over in terms of the trauma of it. But you'd be there, and as you know, in soccer, you have the 6-foot box in front of the goal, and the hockey parents thought that was a crease, and so the players would be there and they'd be like, "Get him out of the crease, ref! Get him out of the crease!" And you have to explain it's not really the crease. And one time, this guy is just like screaming at me, something that wouldn't happen today. We know that we're not supposed to be yelling at children anymore, sports events. But in the 70s, we didn't yet understand that. And this guy's just yelling at me. And my father goes over and said, "Sir, you've got to calm down." Yeah. And it turns out he was the Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court at that time. And he was a little bit embarrassed, and he apologized.
That's good.
It's not like that anymore, as we know.
That's good stuff. So you did go to Georgetown, and you were in foreign service.
Yeah.
So at that time, what were you thinking you wanted to do with your life?
So, I early on thought I'd want to go to law school, but to do something internationally. That's why I was interested in going to SFS. And this is when China was first opening up after the reforms, or the capitalist reforms, and the economic reforms, not the political reforms, obviously. And so I thought, I'd like to be an international lawyer working in China. I don't know why I chose that. I'd never been to China, didn't really know about it. So my senior year, I took Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, which was an 8 credit course, which is a little absurd when you're a senior to do.
Yeah.
And I'm a disaster at languages. So I don't, I learned a little bit, but that turned out not to be. I did go to law school, but I ended up not practicing law in China in any way, shape, or form. I've been there subsequently for soccer-related businesses, but nothing to do with my legal career.
So you went directly into law school at that time?
I did. I went to Berkeley,
Okay.
and was there for 3 years, and then I actually delayed. I went to a firm called Latham and Watkins, which is a big corporate law firm in Los Angeles, international in scope now. But I delayed going for a year. A classmate and I started a couple of software companies. This was back when you could literally start software companies in your garage and try and make a go of it. So we started a company that helped people do legal research. Unfortunately, one of our competitors was bought by a big company, and they started to give that service away for free. So that made our business model really, really challenging.
Yeah.
And then we created a product to help people study for the bar. That worked okay for a little while. So we had some fun for a year working on that. And then I ultimately went to Latham in the fall of 1990.
Yeah. And your career there is really what led you to MLS. Can you explain sort of how that connection was made?
Sure. So at Latham, in many law firms, you do what's called a rotation. You spend 6 months in corporate, 6 months in litigation to try and get a experience in a wide variety of areas. At Latham, they had a different approach. They had something called the book, and the book would just call you with an assignment. It could be in any particular area. And so one day I got a call from the book to work for a guy named Alan Rothenberg. So Alan Rothenberg had founded his own firm in Los Angeles, Manat Phelps Rothenberg, which still exists today, a very famous firm. And he left that in 1990, coincidentally, and came to Latham. And he had been a longtime sports lawyer. He had represented Jack Kent Cooke, who had owned the Redskins, now the Washington Football Club, obviously, the Lakers and the Kings in Los Angeles, and was a very prominent Los Angeles sports figure, and Alan was his right-hand person. And in 1990, Alan, through a variety of different sort of moves, was put in charge of running the World Cup in the United States. The World Cup was going to be held in the United States in 1994, and Alan was in charge of that. And so I got assigned to work for him on something that had nothing to do with soccer. It was a trial that was going on in Los Angeles at that time, and I sort of became close with him. And so about 2 years later, in '93, I overheard him on a speakerphone asking another lawyer if he knew anybody who could help him write a business plan for a professional soccer league. The reason that FIFA had awarded the U.S. the World Cup in '94 is they wanted to use it as a catalyst to start a league. They looked at the U.S. as largest commercial market. Soccer had never really taken hold here. They knew a lot of kids played, but they really thought that there was an opportunity for a league. And in the '84 Olympics, which you'll probably remember were held in Los Angeles, soccer had done quite well. They sold out the Rose Bowl, and it exceeded people's expectations. And so I think there was a belief that soccer could sort of have an opportunity, and the World Cup could be the way to launch it. And so Alan was looking for somebody to help him write the business plan. So I heard him on the speakerphone say this. I ran down 4 flights of stairs. I ran into his office, and I said, "I'll do it." And he said, "You'll do what?" And I said, "I was just in Paul Tossetti's office. You're talking about the business plan. I'll write the business plan." He said, "Have you ever written a business plan?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you know about soccer?" I explained the story about my dad who played. He said, "All right, you did a good job on this project, a couple of years ago. I'll give you a shot." So I took a leave of absence in the summer of 1993 to write the business plan for what became Major League Soccer.
It's a great lesson for our young listeners about seizing an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And having the personal confidence and ability to sort of believe in yourself to go for it.
Yeah, it was not the obvious decision to make, and some of the
give Alan credit too.
Yeah, some of the people, I wasn't the obvious choice, and some of the people in the law firm like, what are you doing there? But it just seemed like such an interesting thing. And I thought about, when I was in Minnesota, so you may remember, we had a league in the '70s, the North American Soccer League.
Yeah, Pele.
Pele came. We had a team in Minnesota, and we drew like 25,000 people a game. This was Minnesota in the mid-1970s.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, well, if it worked in Minnesota in the mid-1970s, by the mid 1990s, so much has changed in this country. It's more diverse than it was. We have a generation who've grown up playing now. We were actually in the World Cup. That I thought that it was a really unique opportunity to launch something like this. And it had really high level backing. It had the World Cup organizing committee. A lot of people were interested in seeing it work.
Right. Yeah.
And I just thought it was a unique opportunity.
It'd be helpful if you could kind of size the growth now over that time, not obviously
Sure.
every detail, but for instance,
Yeah.
when you launched, how many teams were there? And then what were some
Sure.
of the inflection points that have expanded the league and brought it to where it is today?
Yeah. So it's been growth in every way you can think of. We began with 10 teams. We launched in 1996. And, you had to put in $5 million to buy a team. It ended up, you put in a lot more in operating costs over the years.
Right.
So, but the buy-in was $5 million. And one of our original strategies was to build what we call soccer-specific stadiums that were built for soccer to be the primary tenant. We didn't have those in the U.S. We had NFL stadiums, which were among the best in the world, college football stadiums, and that's where the World Cup was played. But you got 80,000 people to come to World Cup games, and we were projecting somewhere in 15,000, and we're higher than that now. But that was what we had been projecting, and so we wanted to have small stadiums where you could have intimate atmosphere. We were the primary tenant. The field surfaces.
That was a critical decision.
Totally key strategy. But when we went around to try and raise the money initially, the owners said, well, if the stadium only has value if we have a league, why don't we see if the league, has some staying power before we invest in a stadium? And that made a lot of sense, right? So we launched the league with 10 teams and no state. We played in, but we made a decision. This was key to play in big American stadiums because we thought it had a major league sort of feel to it. So we played in Giant Stadium, we played in the Rose Bowl. We played in professional quality stadiums, not small minor league stadiums. And I think that was an important decision, even though we couldn't fill them up.
Right.
So, we had 10 teams, $5 million to get in, no stadiums that were built for soccer in the United States. So fast forward to, this is our 25th season. We have 26 teams. We have 20 stadiums that have been built for soccer and more on the way. They cost, $350 to $400 million. People are investing hundreds of millions of dollars to buy teams. So we did last year an expansion team, the latest one that'll come in 2022 in Charlotte. David Tepper, the owner of the Panthers, it's $325 million. And so
to buy in.
Yeah, to buy in, right? Now forget the stadium, forget all the other things that you need to do. So the measure of increase in asset value is stunning. And it's not even just from measuring there. If you take 2007, Toronto came in, they paid $10 million. And, even as four years ago, 2015, 2016 was $100 million. And now it's 325. And that's without the stadium investment you need to make. And so there are teams that are well north of $500, $600 million now. And so I think that's a real measure of growth. In terms of quality of the product on the field, again, really significant growth in terms of the quality, both of the American players that play in the league and the international players that we bring in. So many of our players now compete for their national teams. That's the team that plays in the World Cup. We have great international stars, and we have great American players, both veteran players and young players. And we really made a massive investment now in player development. So all of our teams have these player development academies, and we're seeing a lot of great young talent come out of that. So it's night and day from where we were 25 years ago to where we are now from almost every perspective. But those are some of the highlights. And we've already announced the plan to expand up to 30 teams. So we'll have Austin's going to join us next year as the 27th, and then we've got St. Louis coming in, and Sacramento, and we'll be in Charlotte, and that will get us up to 30 by 2023.
And what are some of the key factors in choosing a city to build a team around?
Yeah, so a number of things. What's always been important to us is the strength of the ownership group. We were very lucky when we launched the league that we had the ownership group that we had. So we had Lamar Hunt, who was one of the sort of great sports people in America. He was the founder of the American Football League that ultimately merged with the NFL. He was an early owner in the North American Soccer League that we talked about before, World Team Tennis. So he was, a legendary sports entrepreneur. And he was the first person to commit that he would be involved in Major League Soccer when we were going out and talking to potential investors. To have an NFL owner of that stature commit, and then Robert Kraft and his family committed, and then Phil Anschutz, who Staples Center in Los Angeles, which you obviously know, LA Kings, a number of sports properties throughout the world, probably one of the world's, through AEG, world's largest live entertainment and sports companies there is. And so that was sort of the three founding partners. There was another group that was a group that had been put together of a number of different people, but these were the three main, and it's grown since then. And on almost, not everybody, but almost all of our owners are people who own teams in other sports. So in Atlanta, one of our most successful teams, both on and off the field, owned by Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons. That's a team that they chose not to build a small stadium. They had confidence that they could fill up a large stadium. They average over 50,000 people playing at Davies Bats. Some games will get 70,000 people there. So, it's people like that. So we always think about who the ownership group is, because that's really important to us. And then what's the stadium plan? And we require these soccer-specific stadiums, except in very rare circumstances where we think, like in Atlanta, we're going to fill up the stadium, or the owner is convinced of that. And then we think about the market demographics. Do we think it can support soccer? Is it a large enough market? For example, is it too saturated with other sports? Does the corporate community support us? And then how does it help us achieve our national and international goals? How does it help achieve, and you were in the television business for a long time, and how does it help us think about what our footprint is and how we're going to increase national viewership? So those are the criteria to take a look at, and have, since the beginning.
One of the things I find so interesting about MLS, even vis-a-vis some other sports leagues and teams, is this fervent fan base, and particularly a young fan base. What do you describe that? What do you describe that to? And
so
talk a little bit about your demographics, because I think that's quite interesting too.
Yeah, so the three broad demographic trends that have been driving the growth of the sport generally in our league specifically. So the first and most important is the Millennial Generation, which all businesses talk about. But if you're somebody who's 30 years old, soccer has been a mainstream sport your entire life. It's different than when you and I grew up, where soccer was sort of this international unique kind of thing that
you played it. You played it in school. You played AYSO, but there wasn't.
Yeah. And you knew who Pele was, but you didn't really, it wasn't a part of your life. Whereas people, not everybody, but a lot of people who've grown up as part of that generation, soccer is much more mainstream. And so I think that's been driving a lot. It's global, and I think that is important. It's only 2 hours, which is important. The players are very accessible, and I think a variety of different things makes it very attractive. The second is, people who either they're first generation or second generation, people whose families came from countries where soccer is a dominant sport. Our countries continue to diversify, and that is a demographic trend that we benefited from. And still the participant base. We've never counted on the fact that people play, that necessarily that means you're going to watch. People always use that as a straw man to sort of knock the sport down. We never said that, but what we did say is obviously that is a group that has an inclination to be fans, and a group that we can sort of market towards. And so those three demographics are help driving it. And what's interesting now about where the country is relative to when we started is, I think when we started the league, there was a question: is there really a fan base for professional soccer? Sure, the World Cup was successful, but the Olympics are successful. People watch a lot of different sports in the Olympics that may not have an ongoing week-to-week fan base. And that was a question in 1994, one that we needed to answer. Now that question's been answered. There are 70 million people in the U.S. who watch a soccer league at least somewhat. And it might be us, it might be the Mexican league, it might be the Spanish league, the English league. And a lot of people watch the Premier League on Saturday mornings. And so it's no longer a question of, is there a fan base? The question is, how do you attract more of that fan base to be fans of our league, in addition to whatever league they might be a fan of? And
Right.
it's really not that complicated to say. They're interested in the product quality, and they're interested in things that help create the fan connection. And so all of our strategies are about investments in those two areas. And then leading back to the question this began with, is what that's translated into is this very fervent supporter movement, which you see in Europe, where the fans, are chanting and have banners and really are engaged in the game. We have that here, and it's really remarkable.
Yeah.
And sometimes people say it's like it combines the passion of college sports, with professional sports. It's not like a normal or other types of professional sporting events.
That's right.
Given that, sure. And these things you've probably seen, these tifos, these massive displays that can cover an entire end, where they have a message that they put up at the beginning of the thing. They have these chants, and each team has its own ritual, which we didn't create. They have to be organic. And so, one of my favorites is in Portland Timbers. When the goal is scored by the home team, there's this guy who revs, he's literally a lumberjack, and he revs up his chainsaw, and there's a big log, and he cuts off a piece of the log, and then they give that to the goal scorer at the end of the game to memorialize the fact that they scored. So it's kind of stunning. You're sitting in a stadium, all of a sudden this chainsaw revs up. But, it's what is unique about our sport. It's that deep, deep connection with the fans that really has, propelled us to where we are.
Yeah, that's great. And really leveraging the deep history of the sport globally and how people connect to the sport globally. You guys are really leverage that in a great way.
Very much so.
What are the prospects sort of with COVID now? I don't know how that's going to affect your next season, but what are your views on when you think things get back to normal, so to speak, and how are you thinking about it?
No one knows, right? No one knows, and everybody's trying to figure it out. We've shown we can operate in a COVID environment safely, so we can execute on games. But to not have fans is a real challenge to the business.
Right. Yep.
And so, we're thinking about when do we think fans might be able to return. You're able to do it in some markets now, but clearly not in most of the markets. And even in those markets where you can, it's severely restricted. And so it's not a sustainable business model to operate without fans for any league and for us. And so I think we're all trying to figure out, next year, when do we think it's most likely we could begin to have fans come back to the stadium, and see if we can figure out the timing of the season to line up with that. I think that testing is improving all of the time, and it's becoming more affordable. Testing is very expensive right now still. If you test every other day, a large population, it's about $150 a test, which is not insignificant.
Yeah.
And there are people coming out with tests that will be fraction of that in the not too distant future. And testing still requires some amount of time to get the results back for what's called the PCR tests, which are the gold standard tests. People are now working on these, what are called rapid test, point of care tests, where you get the result back in 15 minutes or an hour. They don't quite yet have the accuracy of the PCRs, but they're getting close. Yeah. So I think improvements in testing is going to help a lot, because then you're going to be able to more quickly identify people who do have the virus and can be isolated, and potentially maybe even move to testing, fans and other people. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but I think the technology is changing. Yeah. And obviously we're all waiting on a vaccine, and to see whether the vaccine creates some level of immunity within the community that allows people to move forward. So I think everybody recognizes that 2021 is going to be a challenging year. Yeah. And I think our view is that at some point during that year, there's a return to something resembling normalcy, but we don't know exactly the timing of that. And I think everybody anticipates that we should be back by 2022. I don't think the fundamentals that drove live events, sports, concerts have changed. I think people want that shared experience. I think that, people always talked about years ago, will VCRs originally or DVDs destroy the movie business? And they didn't, right? People want to go out and they want to have a social experience. Naturally true with our sport. So much of it is about the social experience that I think that people, once we're able to get a feeling of safety of going out, I think people are going to come back as strong as we had before.
Yeah. When you look out in the horizon, say 5 years from now, 5 to 7 years
Yeah.
from now, what are your sort of dreams and goals for MLS? If you had to tell us what you
Yeah.
see going
So
happening with the sport by then.
we have a very unique opportunity. So the World Cup's going to be in the U.S. in 2026, and so there's a symmetry to. We launched using the World Cup, or benefiting from the World Cup, and now that'll be our 30th season. And so we think that the focus on the sport, the celebration of the sport, the ability to highlight how far the league has come, is really a unique opportunity for us to take advantage of that. And I think that that is
Where will the
almost a
finals
crowning.
be in 2026?
They haven't announced yet. They have
Okay.
not made the decision. And
Okay.
there's so many great facilities in the United States, the large American football. You just had the new stadium open up in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
obviously, one in Atlanta, Las Vegas. And it's the one country in the world that we've always said you could hold the World Cup tomorrow. We're the most prepared country of the world ever because of all of the facilities that we have. Even in '94, it's still the most attended World Cup in history because of the size of the stadiums that we had. No one's matched that. So I think that that's an opportunity for us really to demonstrate to those who perhaps haven't followed us as carefully how far this league has come, and really our objective is, and it's to be one of the best leagues in the world. And in many ways, we've achieved many elements of that. From a business perspective, I think people throughout the world admire what we've been able to do. Our facilities are among the best in the world. The protocols, like on the medical side, we're on the leading edge. We were one of the leading soccer, for a variety of historical reasons, didn't have instant replay like they do in the United States. And so, the whole world in the World Cup could see a goal clearly was a mistake and there was nothing you could do about it. A few years ago, we were part of a group that led an effort. We were one of the handful of first leagues throughout the world to introduce video replay in soccer. So in many ways, we're on the cutting edge, and we're continuing to invest in our product quality to rival some of the best leagues in the world. So I think that's where we see ourselves going in the next several years, and the World Cup being here is sort of a beacon for us to sort of shoot towards to show people that.
And then on the heels of that, then you have in 2028, you have the Olympics.
Yeah, and the Olympics.
Right.
In the Olympics, another example, another ability to showcase the sport. So a lot of attention, both domestically and internationally. But the interest in the league outside the country is strong from a variety of different perspectives. We are part of something called, all the leagues came together and formed an organization to sort of be able to discuss areas of interest and deal with FIFA as one voice among the leagues. And our commissioner, Don Garber, is one of the three leaders of that organization. So, we're a leader in international soccer on the administration side, and a lot of interest in our player quality. In soccer internationally, as you may know, players aren't traded. Their contracts are sold for cash, sometimes a lot of cash. You may have seen that Messi's contract, they ended up not doing it, was $750 million, right? Was the fee that they were requiring to release him, something that order of magnitude. So we've had players, now that have been developed here, who've played here, whose contracts have been sold for $15 or $20 million. That wasn't happening. Talk about changes in the last 25 years. That wasn't even happening 5 years ago. And so I think there's a recognition, not just for players that we've developed, but there's a great number of players now that have come from South America, spent 2 or 3 years here, demonstrated to a wider audience their skill, and found places in Europe or elsewhere, and we've generated a lot of revenue from that. So I think the world's seeing where the league has come from in the last 25 years, or even the last, as I said, 5 years.
Have you considered placing a franchise in Europe, for instance? Have you kicked that around like some of the other sports leagues have?
Yeah, given the organization, the number of leagues that are already organized there, that's really not an opportunity that we see. What we do see, and we did it last year, is more regional rivalries. So we started a competition that was delayed this or postponed this year because of COVID, but last year, where we had 4 of our top clubs play 4 top Mexican clubs in a sort of small tournament. And then we had our champion play their champion. We've done that 2 years in a row, and that's generated a lot of interest. And I think that there's a lot of potential for that moving forward. We do have our own regional Champions League, so people are probably more familiar with the European Champions League. That's where Barcelona plays Man U on a Wednesday, and they play their league games on a Saturday, and they play
Club tournament.
yeah, it's club to club. And so we have a version of that here. It's not as popular, but the games between us and Mexico do well. But I think that focusing on our regional rivalries, I think has a lot of potential, a lot of value for us, more so than looking across the Atlantic at this point.
What do you see as, just more generally speaking, in the sports industry? What are you seeing as some of the key trends? Put aside just the COVID situation.
Yeah, sure.
Just in general, what do you see as some of the key trends in sports?
Yeah, a lot of it is ensuring, and we've benefited from this already, is ensuring that the fan experience in the stadium is superior to what you can see on television, right? And I think a lot of leagues sometimes get worried that, if you just become a television sport and people aren't engaged at the stadium, what that means ultimately for fan avidity over time. And so I think there's a lot of focus on making sure the in-stadium experience, I think that's goes across everything. And then, like all businesses, so much is about how are you using digital to deepen and strengthen the immediacy, the connection with fans. And so I think there's always thought about what are you going to do? How are you going to do that? A lot on integrity. I think everybody recognizes now that with the legalization of sports betting in so many jurisdictions across the country, there was a Supreme Court ruling that said that the federal government couldn't stop states from legalizing sports betting if they wanted to. And so we're seeing the proliferation of that. I think there was a belief for some period of time there might be a direct economic opportunity. While that might be the case, I think it's not as big as the opportunity to grow the fan base. I think it's axiomatic that people who are engaged in gaming in some way are more likely to follow a sport, just follows, right? So I think ensuring that even though that's an opportunity to take advantage of, that we don't lose in the integrity of our sport.
But do you see an opportunity where there will be fans betting on MLS?
Yeah, and it started now.
Is it already happening?
Yeah, we have betting, and we had a lot of betting internationally because in the summer we were the only ones playing. But yeah, there's betting on MLS, and again, it really helps increase the fan interest and
hopefully viewership as well, TV.
Yeah, and viewership, and I think that probably has happened with in other sports, maybe with before there was legal betting, and I think the legal betting is only going to make that better. And we certainly believe that having it legalized allows you to make sure that the types of integrity issues that we would all be concerned about can be managed appropriately. So I think that's a really key trend, and one that's talked a lot about in the industry. And then everybody is, what does the digital disruption mean ultimately for media rights over time? And I think that
should create opportunities for leagues.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think everybody, and we're in this camp. There's never been a disruption where premium content didn't benefit from that disruption. And there's been disruptions over the course of time in media, and this is no different than that. And so our belief is that as we're among the groups of premium content, that we're able to deliver a lot of value to media, no matter what its method of distribution is. But obviously, there's questions about what the business models are going to be going forward for that type of distribution.
What's the biggest challenge? What keeps you up at night the most vis-a-vis MLS?
Yeah, so we are functioning in a global marketplace with global competition, and so what happens in leagues outside the United States, because you can watch them on television here. We have to be cognizant of that from a competitive perspective, and how do we make investments to make sure that we're able to win over fans for the reasons that we've talked about before. And so, and some of those leagues have greater economic basis than we do now. The Premier League has a television contract on par with what, not quite the NFL, but what the other North American sports leagues have. And so to be able to have a league that fans embrace when we don't have the ability to invest what they're able to invest, that's something that we really have to spend a lot of time on. And we're fortunate, we talked about this, we have what they can't, what no other league outside the country can have is we have the live experience. We have the ability to week in, week out, come and have that live experience. And once you have that live experience, then you can follow your team on the media and part of your, social experience. And I think that that's unique for us. And the quality of play is really great now, and the investments that we've made have made this really a top flight league. And so it's that's, I think, where every business like takes a look at what its competition is, and
Yeah.
everybody in the live events business says the same thing, which is true. You're competing against all live events for the consumer
Yeah.
dollar.
It's about that
But in our
shared
case,
mind and
right, share mind and time. I find it's often, we're fortunate that many people are able to afford sporting events. We live in a country where not everybody can, but a lot of people can. And so it's a lot of times, as you just said, a question of what you want to do with your time, right? And I think that's why these stadiums are so important, is that if you're going to spend 2 or 3 hours with your family, you want to be in a great environment. You want to have the amenities that you would expect in any top level sporting event. And it's the decision what you do with your time almost as much as what you do with your money that's just important. And but we have this unique competition from international soccer. There's in England, you probably know, you can't watch all the games because they're played at 3 o'clock and all played at the same time, and those cannot be broadcast because they want to protect the teams from having the fans go. And so those games aren't available. So, we can watch all the Premier League games in the United States. You can't watch them all in England. And that's true of a lot of markets. So there's more soccer available here than any other market in the entire country.
yeah.
It's interesting in terms of also the media market. So the World Cup, and you may remember this, in 2002, we formed a separate company called Soccer United Marketing, which was a company designed to get into other aspects of the professional soccer business in the United States. And one of them was to buy the English language television rights to the World Cup. Nobody was going to broadcast it in the US. And we spent $40 million to buy the rights for the 2002 and 2006 World Cups. And Univision, who bought them in Spanish, which was a very lucrative market, paid 140. So it was 190 million for 02 and 06. 2018, Fox and Telemundo paid 1.1 billion. So 10x in a little over 10 years for the World Cup. It just shows, how the media market for soccer has grown so much in this country.
Yeah. I want to end our chat asking you about career advice. We have a lot of our GEMA members, students or alumni, who are very interested in the sports industry. And just curious if someone on this call is just breaking into the business, or is a student and wants to break in. What's some piece of advice you have on how to do so?
It's hard, and a lot of it's breaking in on the entry level. A lot of it is internships and things of that. I got in, a lot of people my age broke into sports accidentally, like I did. I heard something on the telephone and I ran in. And, you'll find a lot of people my age, that's the way they got involved. And people of my generation, a lot of it was lawyers, turned out to be the people who got involved in sports. And I think it's changed a lot since then. And so I think that breaking into sports initially is hard, and a lot of it is entry level. I also find, though, that there are ways to get into sports, maybe indirectly, by becoming really, really good in a particular industry or discipline. So the one I know the best is law. When we look for lawyers, we often look for lawyers who were great lawyers and then want to get into sports. Now,
right. They don't have to have been in sports previously.
Yeah. Right. We're looking often for the best lawyer that we can find. Now, we do have lawyers who have been in sports for a long time, but they were also great lawyers before they got into sports. And I think that's true in communications. I think that can be true in marketing. So I think that there are indirect ways. So I always find, to find the way that you can be the best at your particular discipline. And that can be an entryway into any particular vertical, right? So if you're a top-level communications person, I think you can find a way into other verticals through that. So I often tell people that, particularly in the legal, which is I know the best. And then I often find that it's very difficult to chart out a career. And how does this piece lead me to the next piece and to the next piece? And so I actually think people should, as best they can, focus on the immediacy of what they're doing. It sounds like a simple and sort of obvious point, but I think it's so true, which is to be very interested in what you're doing, be very curious about it, and to engage in it, and to be energetic about it. And to, I find if you can find what you're doing interesting, no matter what it is, that will lead you to other things, and that will shine through, and people will notice that. And I find sometimes people are bored, or they think something's pedestrian or beneath them or whatever it might be. And I
Yeah.
think there's almost nothing, particularly when you're young, if you're involved in something, do it at the very, very top level you can, because everybody can do something better. And I think that ultimately shines through, and that will lead to your next best opportunity. And you never know, just like I mean, how could you predict being in a law firm and randomly assigned to work for the guy who ran the World Cup? Right? It's not predictable.
That's
What
right.
was good was, as you said, saw the opportunity and sort of jumped in front of it.
Right. Very helpful. Mark, this was great. Really appreciate it. Congrats on all the tremendous success of MLS, and congrats on working through an incredibly complex situation with COVID. I hope the best for the rest of the season. And I know every day you wake up and look up high and say, I hope it works well, because it's a moving target for sure. So congratulations.
Great.
And great catching up, and thanks.
Okay, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark.